Today we're going to make gluten-free mac and cheese with smoky bacon bits. Okay, let's get started. What we're going to need is about 300 grams of macaroni pasta, which I've pre-cooked for about 6 minutes. We're going to need about 250 grams of smoked lardons. Now these are completely optional. Obviously if you're making a vegetarian dish, you can just simply exclude these. Going to need about 50 grams of butter, 150 grams of grated cheddar, about 50 grams of flour. In this case I'm using gluten-free. Breadcrumbs, which you can either buy or make. Again, I'm using gluten-free. Going to use about 20 grams finely grated parmesan, some English mustard and some pepper, and you're going to want some milk. Now the amount of milk you'll need will vary depending on how the sauce goes. Okay, let's go over to the hob and start making the sauce. Okay, what we want to do is add the 50 grams of butter into a frying pan and put that on a low heat. We'll start to warm that through. We can move it around with a wooden spatula and break it up. We don't want too much heat or the butter's going to burn, it will darken and it will turn bitter. So what we need to do is just get that so it's a liquid. Then we can add about half of the flour and we'll stir that in gently with a wooden spatula until the butter and the flour are starting to combine. Once that's starting to look like it's becoming a paste, we can add the other half of the flour. And then we'll stir that around and mix that together for a minute or so until they're all combined to make a nice smooth paste. What we're going to do now is we're going to add some milk. I can't tell you how much milk you'll need because it depends a lot on what milk you're using and what flour you're using. So we'll just add a little bit at a time. We'll add the first bit and we'll combine that using the wooden spatula, but after that I'm going to move over to using a whisk. This will ensure we don't get any lumps in our finished sauce. So to continue stirring that over the heat, and you can add a little more heat at this point, and keep adding milk and whisking it in until we make a nice smooth sauce. Add the milk gradually, and as you'll see now there's a little bit more heat there. That sauce is starting to thicken. Just keep adding it a little splash at a time until we end up with a nice creamy sauce. As that's starting to cook through now with that little bit more heat, you can see the sauce is thickening. So now we're going to add a heaped teaspoonful of English mustard and stir that in. Then we're going to add a few turns of black pepper and we're going to stir that into the sauce. If the sauce is feeling a bit thick at this point, just add a splash more milk. Keep whisking that around until you've got a nice, creamy, smooth, lump-free sauce. Okay, let's take this back over to the table. And as you can see, we've got a nice, creamy sauce. It's not too thick, we need it reasonably thin because the pasta will absorb some of this sauce. We don't want it drying out too much. So at this point, I'm going to add about half of the cheddar. Then we're going to stir this into the sauce. We do this off the heat, otherwise the cheddar will get too hot and it will start to split and you'll see the oil floating to the surface. So you can see now that's thickening up to be a nice cheese sauce. The cheddar is just about dissolved in the heat that's left in the sauce. So now we can add the remainder. And again, stir that in. If you put it all in at once, it just tends to stick into a big clump and takes a lot more work to stir in. Okay, you can see you've got a nice creamy cheese sauce there. And that's thickened that a little bit, but again, it's thin enough that the pasta will be able to absorb some of that. Okay, now what we want to do is add the pasta. Again, this was pre-cooked earlier. Cook it as per the instructions on the pasta. This is gluten-free. Do find the cooking times a little bit longer. Obviously, if you're using fresh pasta of any description, there's no need to pre-cook. And then stir that into the sauce. Need to give this a good work around. We want all those tubes filled up with the sauce. Now the measurements I've used today are based on this bowl. If you want to estimate your own pasta weight, what I typically do is take the bowl that I'm going to use, that I'm going to bake in, and fill it to about the halfway mark with dry pasta. And then once that's cooked, obviously the pasta expands with the other ingredients. That should easily bring it under the top of the pan. If you cook too much pasta and you have it left over, just make a second little dish with it. Okay, now we're going to bring in the lardons. As I say, 250 grams, fry them off gently beforehand, let them sit on a bit of kitchen towel, drain any excess oil out. Now we can add these. These are smoked. You can use unsmoked, it's entirely up to you. And we're going to stir these in as well. Obviously, if you're vegetarian, you'll want to skip this bit. You can see that's just enough so that once that's stirred in, you're going to get a little bit in each bite. Using smoked ones really does help. It just gives an additional bit of flavour. Okay, so there we have it. That is the pasta and lardons in with the cheese in a nice cheese sauce. And I crank that round quite a lot because I want to make sure all those pasta tubes are nice and full. You don't have to use macaroni. You can use pasta twists, pasta tubes, anything you fancy. Obviously a mac and cheese is traditionally a macaroni pasta, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so move that out of the way, bring the bowl in that I'm going to use, and then we can slowly add that. And let's just even that out and let it settle. As I said, if you use about half the depth of the bowl you're going to use with dry pasta, by the time it's cooked and you've added the other ingredients, you should still be below the top line. Okay, now we're going to add some more black pepper just across the top. We're going to sprinkle the Parmesan lightly over the top. If you don't have Parmesan, just use more cheddar, or if you have different cheeses in, maybe use one for the sauce and a different one for the topping. So there we go, that's the Parmesan. Now we're going to add some breadcrumbs. Again, as I said, I'm making this dish as gluten-free, so these are gluten-free. You can make your own if you want to. The easiest way to do this is just get some gluten-free bread, trim off most of the crusts, warm your oven up to about 150, lay the bread on the shelves directly, turn off the oven, leave it for about 3 or 4 hours, then crush them up. I've bought these are packet ones. So I can't tell you how many you're going to need, it will depend on the size of your dish. And we're just going to sprinkle these over the top. What we want to do is create a nice crunch on top. There we go. So we've got that parmesan sitting under there. We've got the breadcrumbs sitting on top. Once that heats, that's all going to stitch together, going to melt all in together and hopefully brown up nicely. So what we need to do is pop this in the oven at 180 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes. You can make this in advance and just pop it in the fridge, stick it in the oven when you need it. If you're cooking from completely cold, I would probably add another 5 or 10 minutes to it, but keep an eye on it. Okay, I'll get this in the oven and I'll bring it back once we've cooked it. Okay, here we are. That's been in the oven now at 180 degrees for just over half an hour. So let's serve up some and take a look. There you have it. Gluten-free mac and cheese with smoky bacon bits. Thanks for watching. I hope you've liked today's video and found it useful. If you have, perhaps you'd like to give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell, and then you'll get alerts when I release future videos. Thanks again for watching.